Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, coming to you from LAist Studios in Pasadena, California, not far from downtown Los Angeles, where just a few hundred National Guard troops are still deployed. That's months after President Trump sent them there to quell protests over immigration raids. That was the start of Trump's use of the National Guard in cities across the country, often over the objection of local officials. And that's what we're going to talk about this hour on The Middle. But first, let me say hi to our DJ, Tolliver. Tolliver,
Hey.
we have some new listeners this week.
Yeah, a ton of them. We're now live in the North Country of New York State on North Country Public Radio, all the way from Plattsburgh to Lake George to Fort Drum. And we are also now live across North Dakota on Prairie Public.
Awesome. Yes, and Prairie Public has been airing us, but not live. Now, if you hear a lot of North Dakotans on The Middle, you'll know why. Welcome to everyone, including, by the way, the people listening on North Country in Canada. Bienvenue. So, on the show this hour, Portland, Oregon, Memphis, Tennessee. These are the latest cities preparing for a deployment of National Guard troops in their streets. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker says he doesn't want the troops in Chicago, but he said this week they are likely on the way to protect immigration facilities. In Tennessee, the Republican governor is asking for the troops to combat crime in Memphis, which has one of the highest murder rates in America. But in Oregon, leaders are resisting. Here's the Democratic Attorney General Dan Rayfield.
In America, we don't use our United States military on our own citizens, but except in extreme circumstances. It's actually un-American, if you think about it, to use the military against our own citizens. But that's exactly what's happening right now across our country, from California to D.C. to Memphis to Illinois and now to Portland.
So this hour, we're asking you what you think of President Trump's use of the National Guard in American cities. We're taking your calls at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. But first, a breather from politics. Enjoy it. Some of your voicemails from last week's show about creativity and why you create.
My name is Johnny. I live in Vermont. I cook. I write poetry. Sometimes I draw. I do lots of creative things because we don't have enough time, and I think it's important to human thought to make something out of nothing.
This is Melissa Trace. I live on Isle of Palms in South Carolina. I garden and I create beautiful spaces with color and texture and fragrance and different heights. And I do it because it makes me happy to see the flowers, to be able to change it every season, and to have people stop by, and it makes them happy.
My name is Sue An. I'm calling from Greensboro, North Carolina. I think art is creation just as much as energy is. I feel like without art, especially when you're trying to navigate such a hectic time, I think art is the only true form of magic that still kind of lingers in this world.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Well, thanks to everyone who called in. You can hear that full show by subscribing to The Middle wherever you listen to podcasts. So now back to our hectic time and our question this hour. What do you think of President Trump's use of the National Guard in American cities? Tolliver, the phone number, please.
You can deploy your calls at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
Joining us this hour, retired Major General Linda Singh of the Maryland Army National Guard. General Singh, welcome back to The Middle.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm happy to be here.
And we're also joined by WTOP News Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller in Washington, D.C. Mitchell, welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Happy to join.
Well, before we get to the phones, General Singh, when we planned to do this show, the cities that had experienced National Guard troops under Trump were L.A., where I am, and Washington, D.C., where Mitchell is. Now we're talking about Portland and Memphis and New Orleans and Chicago, St. Louis, maybe Baltimore. This is escalating very quickly. What do you think of it?
Well, I think it becomes challenging because if this is not sustainable, number one. The second piece is that we're really not fixing the systemic problem that exists. We're really trying to put a quick fix and push it as a long-term solution. And I think that we're really not focusing where we need to be. We should be putting more federal focus on how do we fix the systemic issues that have been there for a long time. And the National Guard is not designed for this. It's not the reason why we typically deploy them on the streets. And so I think the challenge becomes making sure that we're trying to get at what the actual problem is and what is the outcome that we want to achieve. And I don't think that we're all on the same sheet of music when it comes to that.
Mitchell Miller, when it comes to what the National Guard troops are actually doing, they've been in Washington, D.C. for a couple of months now. What are they doing?
Well, they're doing a lot of things that people are kind of a little bit confused about. Initially, they were here on the very major thoroughways of the tourism here in DC, on the National Mall, near the major tourist spots. And then over the last few weeks, they've kind of been spreading out in various spots, and they've been collecting trash, they've been spreading mulch. They've been getting into some of the communities. So it's interesting because over the last couple of weeks, particularly, we haven't seen them as much in a public role as we did when they first got here. Now, keep in mind there are more than 2,200 National Guard members, including the DC National Guard, as well as National Guard personnel from 8 states. So there's a lot of people here, but there are a lot of people here in DC kind of questioning what are they doing right now. Overall, however, the crime has gone down during that crime emergency that was announced by President Trump. Whether or not that was directly as a result of the National Guard or because of thousands of other federal law enforcement officials that have flooded the streets in DC, we'll have to assess that at a future date. But at any rate, it's interesting because I have seen National Guard members walking around my neighborhood, actually, but I haven't seen them as prominently in these tourist areas that we saw them before.
Interesting. Now, Washington, D.C. is a unique situation just because of the way that it's set up. But General Singh, is there a difference in your mind between National Guard troops being used in a state where the governor asks for them, like Tennessee, for example, versus a state where the governor says do not deploy them, like Illinois?
Absolutely. I think there's a big difference. Well, one, if we're being asked to deploy and the governor is not wanting us, that automatically kind of puts a little bit of friction. It starts making the National Guard as the bad people coming in and trying to take over. And that's not what we want because many times the National Guard, we live in these communities that we get deployed to. And while it may be a National Guard deploying from another state into a particular state, we still live within the community. And I think that that is going to get very confusing to people. And I think it's going to, or I hope that it does not turn around and be what we've seen when our Vietnam veterans were coming home, where people have turned against the military, and in particular, they turn against the National Guard because they don't really, know any better.
Well, Mitchell, how do people feel about the National Guard troops that are there in Washington?
It's interesting. I think there's been a change in connection with the fact when they first got here. Frankly, there were some people that were kind of nonplussed about it, but then there were some people that were very angry about it. They didn't like the idea that the National Guard were on patrol moving around DC when they felt that crime had been coming down here in the District of Columbia. However, I have noticed over the last few weeks that there has been kind of a softening of the attitude toward National Guard people. I mean, personally, I have been somebody who lived in areas that had lots of military personnel, and I always would say hello or welcome them. And I've talked to Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, who happens to reside in D.C. for periods of time during Congress, and he says he always kind of says hello to them. And so I think a lot of these personnel, frankly, don't really be here, or they're not really sure what their role is. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, they have been given these jobs like picking up the trash and spreading mulch and doing other things, painting fences, that type of thing. But that's not really what many Guard members really want to do when they get deployed.
Well, General Singh, what did you think when you heard President Trump say the other day that to top military leadership that he wants the military to use U.S. cities as training grounds?
That's a very bad idea for many reasons. Number one, we need to train When we talk about training for the National Guard and really for all of our military, we need to train as we fight. And we do not want people training in U.S. cities in that manner. And so I think that we have to really recalibrate how we're thinking about that and what does that truly mean. Because in many cases, when we're going overseas into these different environments, we need to be training and being prepared to do that. And right now, our focus is not on that. And so I think we're potentially going to lose focus for a very strategic force that we've been counting on very heavily for at least the last 2 decades.
Because when you're training in a U.S. city, what would it be? What would you be training for exactly if you were military training in a U.S. city to what? Go fight in Afghanistan or something like that?
Well, I mean, no, we wouldn't. I mean, that's the challenge, right? Like a lot of times that we're going out and getting prepared to deploy, we are training in training areas that's very much like where we're going to be going. And so that's not what we're seeing in our
Yeah.
U.S. cities. It's nothing like it. And I think that if people, were to go to Ukraine or Afghanistan
Yeah.
and even into Kuwait, you would see that our cities are nothing like that. And while, yes, we do have crime, but it's
Right.
still nothing like what you would see overseas.
Well, the phone lines are lighting up at Tolliver. Before Donald Trump, the National Guard was actually deployed right here in L.A. because of the rioting that occurred after the verdict in the Rodney King trial in 1992.
Yeah, Rodney King, for our younger listeners, was beaten during his arrest by LAPD officers, and it was filmed. This is before everyone had a camera, so it was very rare. It led to an uproar. Here's President George H.W. Bush announcing that the National Guard deployment would happen back in 1992.
What followed Wednesday's jury verdict in the Rodney King case was a tragic series of events for the city of Los Angeles. Nearly 4,000 fires, staggering property damage, hundreds of injuries, and the senseless deaths of over 30 people. To restore order right now, there are 3,000 National Guardsmen on duty in the city of Los Angeles. Another 2,200 stand ready to provide immediate support.
Worth noting, though, that National Guard deployment came at the request of the governor and the mayor of Los Angeles. Tolliver, what are we listening to here?
This is Childish Gambino with This Is America. It's a scathing indictment of our politics. Pretty much speaks for itself with the title, right? More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking you, what do you think of President Trump's use of the National Guard in cities? Tolliver, the number again, please.
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media.
I'm joined by retired Major General Linda Singh of the Maryland Army National Guard and WTOP News Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller. And surprise, surprise, Tolliver, every single phone line is full.
The emails, too.
Let's get to one of them and open up a line. Lisa is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Lisa, what do you think of the National Guard in cities?
Well, hi, thanks for taking my call. I love your show. I don't think the National Guard are trained to beat law enforcement officers. I think being a good law enforcement officer takes specific training and experience. What I'd rather see is money and support go to hire officers in communities so the police are able to respond. As your guest, Linda Singh, stated, I think National Guard members are well trained, but they have a different focus or intent. But my big question is, are there metrics for what they have accomplished? As your other guests described, we've heard about maintenance work and the statement crime has gone down, but I'd like to hear more about what kind of areas they've been sent into and how they've made an impact. Is their presence more than just an intimidation factor?
Lisa, thank you for that question. Mitchell Miller, are there metrics? Are people looking in Washington and saying, okay, they managed to bring crime down by this much, or do we even know how long they're going to stay? Has there been a goal set? If they do this, then they'll leave?
It's a great question, and it's a very complicated answer, quite frankly. Yes, I noted that the crime has gone down, but to what extent is that directly related to the National Guard, and what extent is that related to the fact that there are thousands of more ICE members of the Homeland Security Department. They're also making arrests. CBS News actually did a review of the data, and they have found that roughly almost 40% of the arrests have been made in DC over the last few weeks have been related to immigration. So the president has said that he wants to go after violent crime. Obviously, immigration is part of what he wants to go after. It's really unclear how much the impact has been related to the National Guard in terms of how much is crime really going down because of these National Guard personnel being in DC. I think it's almost irrefutable that just the fact that you have armed National Guard members patrolling in DC, that is going to have some kind of an effect. But what is it specifically that you can actually attribute to that? I don't think that that's a very easy answer. And to the point that we were talking about earlier, what is the cost? We're talking about close to $2 million a day for having all these National Guard members in DC. And as was mentioned earlier, it's really something that's unsustainable. It's something that you can do a surge with and perhaps bring down crime for a month or so. But what happens after that?
Yeah, interesting. Let's go to John in Worcester, Massachusetts. John, go ahead with your thoughts. What do you think of the National Guard in the cities?
So I think I'm going to take a middle position on it. I think it's probably good in some cities and probably bad in the others. I think that having a presence there and a show of force has certainly worked in Washington, D.C., and I think the legality of, it's a federal district as opposed to a local city or, a state, I think that makes a difference. I'm also curious what actually they're doing. My understanding is they're not really making any arrests. I could be wrong, but my thought was, at least in DC, is they're there for a show of force and allows cops that are actually on the beat and detectives to do their investigation, so they're not dealing with kind of quality of life crimes, because with the show of force the quality of life crimes go down. I don't know how I feel about it in Portland or in Illinois, where the governor doesn't want it. I think there's definitely a federalism issue there, but certainly I think the other issue is they're going to these cities. Well, he's focusing on the blue cities, and I think a lot of that focus is because there tends to be, or at least the perception is, that they're softer on crime. And I don't know how the argument of the cashless bail is, but I do know, there's a lot of people that are getting out there that have mental health issues, and there's a lot of issues. I know somebody whose father was just killed right outside of Worcester, taking his kid to school because he ran into a guy who was doing graffiti. And he said, "Hey, you shouldn't do that," and called the cops. And the guy who was doing the graffiti took out a gun and shot him. Yeah. That guy had been arrested in the last 5 years, been released.
Well, John, a lot there already. So let me take that to our guests, and I should say also, like most of the cities in this country are what you would call blue anyway. Right. So even if they're in very red states, but Linda Singh, he makes a few points there, and one of them is the National Guard are not allowed to actually arrest people, right? That's they wouldn't be allowed to do that.
It depends on what status they're in. So that's not a yes or no. It depends on what status they're in and how they've been given, direction. And so right now we're not seeing them do arrest, right? They usually can detain. But they're not even being used, like in DC, they're not being used in that manner either. So I think it's a more difficult answer because they have to be in the right status. So National Guard has to be in the right status. If it is a Title X force, an active duty force that is being deployed in, they are not supposed to be doing any type of arrest or even detaining. So it's a little bit more complicated in terms of the rules and the regulations behind it, and making sure that we're really following along with what's supposed to happen, depending on where they're deployed, how they're deployed, and the status that they're in.
A call from one of the cities that, if it doesn't already have National Guard troops deployed, it probably will soon. Chicago, Illinois. Dale is calling in. Dale, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I think the prospect of using the National Guard in Chicago specifically, our crime is very located in small pockets of the city. We as Chicagoans, we all know where they are. I think you would see a temporary reduction, but our issues are systemic. The minute the National Guard left, there would have no lasting impact. And the last thing I would say is you cannot discount the element of race. If it's a black city, a black mayor with a large black population, you see it singled out by Trump and his rhetoric, both for delegitimizing the voting results of those areas, and those are the cities that he wants to target. So I don't think there's any way to separate race from this overall emphasis on sending in the National Guard.
Interesting. Dale, thank you very much for that. By the way, General Singh, the president has made the case that the reason he has to do this is that the crime in some of these cities is an emergency. The National Guard has been used many times in the past to restore order or deal with civil unrest. Can the case be made that crime in general is civil unrest?
Based on where we are today, it is my view that we're not there. But when we are using very general terms and we have not developed a criteria that says this is the level in which crime has to be for National Guard to be brought in as a deterrence. We are using very ambiguous terms, and we're just saying, well, crime is up and it's an issue and we need to deal with it. And to me, we're not at that level. And I think the danger of that is that when we have a true emergency that happens, this kind of sets a very false narrative for what the National Guard is supposed to do.
Tolliver, what's coming in online at listentothemiddle.com?
Sarah says Trump's actions are reshaping America for the long haul. The hidden faces of ICE agents only add to the need for sustained vigilance. This won't stop until the 3/5 rule is reinstated and rich white men regain complete control. Susan says, why is everyone wringing their hands and wasting breath discussing the National Guard being deployed to cities to fight crime? What a bunch of naive Pollyannas. The National Guard is being sent under the guise of fighting crime. They're being put in a place to be all set and ready when the fascist in the White House declares martial law.
Okay.
A lot of stuff.
Stan is calling in from Longmont, Colorado. Hi, Stan. Go ahead.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for having my call. I'm a 6-year U.S. Navy veteran, and my view and my opinion and understanding of the National Guard is that they're a readiness force that's there to provide a assistance to a wartime fighting element overseas, or in the case of having a actual crisis in the continental United States, providing some kind of help or support for the local emergency responders. So in my understanding and view, it is completely not the purpose or the point of the National Guard to go in and provide any kind of law enforcement capability in any city, anywhere in the United States. That's the job of local federal law enforcement. And I think that if the necessity is there for increased crime fighting, then the resources need to be applied to the correct place, which is law enforcement, local or federal.
Stan, how would you feel, by the way, as somebody who's a veteran, how would you feel if you were put in the position of doing what these troops are being asked to do right now?
Oh, I would absolutely go AWOL. Like, I joined after having watched the second plane hit the Twin Towers in 9/11, and I got deployed actually right as Hurricane Katrina hit
New Orleans.
You know, right as Hurricane Katrina happened, and my thought and instinct on the boat when we were getting ready to go to the Persian Gulf was, we really should be going to Louisiana to help assist Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
So I would absolutely not be happy about being deployed on U.S. soil for the appearances of fighting crime.
Stan, thank you so much for the call. Thank you for your service. Mitchell Miller, I'll go to you. I assume that in the course of the time in the last couple of months that you've had National Guard troops in Washington, D.C., that you've talked to some of them. Have you heard any comment? How do they feel?
It's an interesting mix. I think some of them say, well, this is what we were ordered to do, and so we're doing it. I think another unsaid thing that often they will kind of allude to is the fact that we just feel like we could be better deployed. There is something more important that we could be doing than the aforementioned picking up the trash, doing the mulching, painting signs. There are other things that they do that are important. For example, the DC National Guard recently went to Ward 8, which is a very crime-ridden area, and they did kind of a beautification thing. And that's part of a community involvement that the Guard has, and I'm sure Linda. Overall, I think these Guard members that are from other parts of the country, they're a little bit mystified as to why they're patrolling around DC right now.
Tom is calling in from Tallahassee, Florida. Tom, what do you think of the Guard in cities?
Hello. I think that thinking that Trump is sending the National Guard to the cities just for crime is so naive. These are the first moves to prepare the public for the next move. You just read a tweet or something from another listener that it was for a martial law. Actually, I'm saying that it is to prevent the fair and free and fair elections in the next year or in 2028. This is just to prepare the public for the bigger action in the blue city, in the cities, in the blue, not for the swing states. He's gonna deploy the National Guard to prevent the elections to be free and fair. Maybe he's gonna put the soldiers around the precincts, voting booths, to disrupt the voting process and everything. Think about it. The people who did January 6th are not going to give the power willingly in elections.
Tom, thank you for that. Yes, no, it's an interesting point, and there are certainly people that do believe that, General, saying that this is something sort of getting people used to the idea of troops on the streets in cities, and that Trump may want to do this before an election. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'd recommend folks go out and take a look at War Game.
The movie that you did, yeah.
Exactly, the documentary. We kind of tabletop this, an exercise very similar to this, and I think what we're potentially seeing unfold could be a lot more dangerous. And I agree with a number of the listeners that I think that there are other motives here that we're not paying attention to. And what I would caution everyone is that, let's not let the noise of what is being pushed out really distort our view of what is actually happening. And so when I think about overall, I think we're headed off a cliff.
Wow. Let me get to one more call before we take a quick break here. Lee is in Asheville, North Carolina. Lee, what do you think of the Guard in cities?
Hello. I guess when I think about like Portland, it's a very peaceful city from everything that I know of it. I think a lot of what the president's rhetoric might almost be referring back to protests many years ago, like in 2020, that were more disruptive to, the daily life. But I really don't feel like at present there are any protests there that are nearly disruptive or anything that would merit it being called a war zone, quote unquote. And it really feels to me like he's trying to have this chilling effect on protests and general dissent in day-to-day life, is what it feels like to me anyway.
Yeah. Lee, thank you for that. Mitchell Miller, I won't ask you about Portland because you're not there, but you're in Washington. Were people saying the same kind of thing in D.C. when Trump sent the National Guard into D.C.? Well, that doesn't feel like a war zone to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the president said a few weeks ago that people were afraid to go to a restaurant for several years, that's just not true. People were
some of the best restaurants in the country are in Washington.
Right. It's a foodie town. That's a whole nother issue. But so it was a disconnect for a lot of people that lived here that, yes, crime has been going up. The crime in the 80s, when I first moved here in the late 80s, there were 450 to 500 murders a year. Now we're talking a fraction of that, just over 100. So it's a matter of degree. And going back to the National Guard, it's interesting because I was here in the Capitol where I am right now when the National Guard was not called initially during January 6th. And there were people down the hall from where I am right now pounding on doors, going after people, and the National Guard was not activated for a variety of reasons, which we don't have to go into here. But it just goes to show that the National Guard can be, held up in a lot of different ways, whether it's a Democratic governor not deciding to bring in the National Guard to his state, or whether it was the president during January 6th.
Yeah. Well, Tolliver, as we said, the National Guard has been federalized a number of times throughout our history, including during the Civil Rights era.
Yeah, President Lyndon Johnson sent troops into Detroit to quell the 1967 Detroit riots, but he was very clear about why he was doing it.
Law enforcement is a local matter. It is the responsibility of local officials and the governors of the respective states. The federal government should not intervene except in the most extraordinary circumstances. The fact of the matter, however, is that law and order have broken down in Detroit, Michigan, and the federal government, in the circumstances here presented, had no alternative but to respond.
And at the request, by the way, of the governor of Michigan, who was Mitt Romney's father, George Romney. Tolliver, what are we listening to here?
This is U2 with Sunday Bloody Sunday, a song about British soldiers shooting unarmed Irish civilians during a civil rights march in 1972. Truly a stain on history that you could never wash out. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour, we're asking you what you think of Trump's use of the National Guard in American cities. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. I'm joined by WTOP News Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller in Washington, D.C., and retired Major General Linda Singh of the Maryland Army National Guard. And let's get right back to the phones. And John, who's in Fort Worth, Texas. John, what do you think about the National Guard in cities?
Well, let me just start by saying I was the first volunteer for Ukraine in 2022. I'm also an Ambassador Circle member to the Carter Center. And President Carter monitors about 200 countries' elections to ensure they're free and fair. And I asked President Carter, what good does it do for you to monitor elections everywhere? You have a guy like Vladimir Putin, who literally bombed his own people to get elected and said that democracy is a stage card to dictatorship, bombed his own people in Ryazan, and the local police caught the FSB planting bombs, using terrorism to crack down on people's freedoms.
That's what you see this as? That's what you see the National Guard in cities as, terrorism to crack down on people's freedoms?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're using crime to get people to give up their freedoms. Yeah. And I'll tell you something else. It's against the law. Forget everything else. There's a reason Posse Comitatus exists. It's because of the Ludlow massacre. When union members struck to get better wages, the Army came in and machine gunned them.
I'm glad
forget
that
everything else. It's against the law.
John, I'm glad you brought up Posse Comitatus because we should explain that. And Linda Singh, this is an act from the 1800s that basically says National Guard is not allowed to be used for civilian law enforcement. You tell me if I didn't do that right.
Right. So so there again, it's very complicated when you have to be in the right status. If they are in a state status, then they can be used to support local law enforcement. That's actually the place that you would want them to be, because that's when they can be deputized, they can support local law enforcement. When we're in a Title 32 status or a Title 10 status, we should not be used in that manner, and that's when Posse Comitatus really applies. But what I think is and we can say that it's against the law in the way that they're being used today. Not necessarily true. They are actually using small snippets of wording to be able to do this within their legal authority. The only thing I have to say is it is a crisis and it is an emergency. And if I deem it as a crisis and an emergency, and I'm using that as the mechanism and crime, or if it's, supporting ICE agents and I'm saying that, we need to protect federal property, then that gives the president the authority to be able to do that. And I think people, we should go out and be looking at how are they using this in each of the different cities, because they are slightly different. How are they using it? What is the terminology and what is the executive order that's being pushed? Because it's very enlightening when you start looking at how this is being done.
Fabio is calling us from Chicago. Hi, Fabio. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hello, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. Well, I think this is one of the steps this administration is taking to put in place a fascist regime. I don't know which other words we can use nowadays. I'm Italian, so we studied how Mussolini was able to come to power. He won the elections like this president did, and then he did every step possible to take freedom and the ability to any other group or political party to express their opinion or to even act. I mean, he's putting the army in the streets. ICE agents are all around Chicago, this beautiful city. I have to see in the streets people with masks, heavily armed. It's scaring for everybody, not just for the immigrants that, of course, are risking to be deported for sometimes absolutely no reasons. They are in the process to have citizenship or be allowed to live and work in this country, but they are taking before being able to go to court or while they are in court. So it's really frightening. And as I say, this is just one step, right? The Attorney General of the United States is the personal attorney of Donald Trump. I mean, or we could just read Project 2025, right? And that is the instauration of a fascist regime. So we are in a complete constitutional crisis right now with this president that is doing whatever he wants, right and left. And,
well, and just I think just to correct the record, I believe it's the Deputy Attorney General that was the personal attorney of Trump. The Attorney General was the Attorney General of Florida, Pam Bondi. But point taken, Fabio. Thank you very much for that, Mitchell Miller. You've been in Washington for many years, decades, in fact. You're in the political center of the country. These are things that people around the country are saying right now. We've heard it on this show before. Not everybody believes it, but we've now heard the word fascism, I think, a few times in this hour. What about on Capitol Hill? Is that being talked about, or does that sound just totally alien to people? If we were to have members of Congress on here, if they heard somebody say that, what would they think?
Well, I understand the concern, and as I alluded to earlier, when the National Guard was first deployed, there were people actually who were frankly not very nice to the Guard personnel. They're just trying to do their job, and people came up to them, they swore at them. They were clearly angry at the fact that there were armed National Guard members making patrols. On the other hand, I would say that I think it's a little bit more benign, at least at this point. These are people that are just making patrols. They're doing a lot of different things, just basically under order. And I also will say that even though the crime has gone down, the president has said it basically was eliminated. Of course, that's not true. Crime is never eliminated in any major city across the country, no matter how many National Guard members, no matter how many federal officers that you have out on the street. And as just one small example, just a few blocks from my house a few weeks ago, a DC firefighter had a gun put in his chest by a teenager, and he was almost killed. He grabbed the barrel of the gun, and the gun went off, and he was injured, and the teenager was injured. So the crime is going to continue to happen no matter what. But again, I understand the concerns people have about the fact that you have armed National Guard military personnel out on streets in various cities across the country.
Well, and Linda Singh, as you said early on, this is a temporary solution. It's not like the National Guard troops would be there forever. We did an entire hour about crime, which, by the way, is coming down around the country, even if it is higher than in other countries around the world. But one of the things that our experts said in that hour was the reason that other countries in Europe, let's say, have lower crime is in part because they have way more police officers, not temporarily on the streets, but permanently on the streets. And also there are cameras everywhere.
And their repercussions are a
And
lot
there are
more
no guns.
stringent, right? Like, I mean, I think we really do need to kind of get back to focusing on the system and how do we change the system for longer term advancement. And that means restructuring dollars. When we went away from, or we went through this whole defund the police, what were we expecting to happen? Like, were we expecting crime to just dissipate because we decided that we wanted to start focusing on defunding the police? I mean, you have to think about, some of this we've kind of caused to come into place, but when it gets to our National Guard, this is a highly trained strategic force that is used to support active duty, active Army, active Air Force in a deployed environment. But what we also have to remember is the National Guard, as we are members of your community, we live and we work in your communities. We're your mothers, your sisters, your brothers, we're your children. And so just keep in mind that when you are in one of these cities and you see them, they are being asked to carry out an order. And if they were to say no, they will get court-martialed.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have that liberty because they raised their hand. They took an oath. Whether we like it or not, they took an oath. And so let's just keep in mind that, when you see someone wearing that uniform on the street, just keep in mind that they're probably a mother, a father, a sister, a brother to someone.
Let's go to Bill, who's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Hi, Bill. What do you think of the National Guard in cities?
Well, I think it's a disgrace. I agree with the general. I think that I respect her. Thank you for your service, by the way. I respect her, and I think, unfortunately, it's going to be up to our brave men and women in uniform to hold the line if this aggressive overreach continues. I mean, we've got a president who's watching B-roll from Portland from 2020 and projecting it out like it's modern day, like it's like it happened yesterday. And this is the reality our chief lives in. You've got a border czar who's taking bags of money under the table, and then the charges and the fight it just disappears somehow. And you've got people on the other side where there's no good faith arguments, there's no civil discourse. Even my educated friends who are Republicans who have had for 30 years, there's no talking, there's no good exchanges, there's no civil discourse. It's me, my facts, and I cite my facts, and them either withdrawing or countering with Caroline Leavitt talking points. That's the reality we live in today, and it's horrific and it's shameful, and I'm embarrassed. Thank you for the time.
Bill, thank you very much. Mitchell Miller, as you hear that, on Capitol Hill, is that the conversation? Do you see just Republicans saying this is good and Democrats saying this is bad among lawmakers?
Yeah, what he was saying resonated with me because I hear it all the time. Both sides point fingers at each other and say the other one is just worse than the other side. And you've seen it, as we're going forward with this government shutdown right now, that it just exacerbates it. But you see it all the time in congressional hearings, and there's very little across the aisle discussions among lawmakers today that there used to be. And, not to go back to halcyon days from the past, but there was a time when lawmakers from both parties actually would discuss things thoughtfully and try to come to solutions. And right now, what they generally try to do, and both parties do this, is they try to put political points up on the board. And that's really the bottom line for each of the parties.
You mentioned the government shutdown. I know Tolliver's been seeing a lot of people asking the question online of whether the Guards troops are being paid during the government shutdown, or does the government shutdown have any impact on the ability of the National Guardsmen to be deployed?
It does not affect them in terms of they are not getting paid. So they are like many other military personnel across the country because of the federal government shutdown. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that the administration might move around some funds to make things available. But essentially, the people that are out of work right now or furloughed by the government, they are not getting paid, including the military, unless they're considered essential personnel. And you had to go back to 2019, which was the longest government shutdown ever, that was close to 35 days. After that, Congress decided we need to make members of the federal government and the military whole again, and so they will get paid whenever this government shutdown eventually ends.
Right, but that that could be a while, and it's not easy to go without a paycheck for a long period of time, especially right now with the cost of everything. Let's go to Jackson, who's in Lee's Summit, Missouri. Jackson, welcome to the middle. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for having me. I think to kind of understand this better, there's really two things we need to remember about Trump. Number one, he's just he's a big messaging guy, right? Like, if you take one of his biggest projects from his first term, the border wall didn't really ever get finished, right? And another thing is that he's really someone who values loyalty a lot. So I think if there's one thing that we want something good to come out of this whole National Guard situation, I think that the governors and maybe the mayors of these cities could take this opportunity to embrace the National Guard, right? Because, like, as we saw in Washington, D.C., they don't really or the National Guard troops don't really have the opportunity to enforce the law so much as just, like, provide public work services and that kind of thing that can be of value to cities. And so I think this is a good opportunity for governors and mayors to build relationships with the president and to have something good come out of this, because, to be clear, I do believe that it is a slippery slope and that this isn't really a good thing. But I think that Trump is really a big messaging guy, and I'm really not sure that this whole National Guard occupation will go to one of those doomsday situations we've heard a lot about.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. Linda Singh, what do you think about that? What would you think about, J.B. Pritzker, the Democratic governor of Illinois, saying, okay, if this is what's going to happen, why don't I just embrace it and say, great, thank you. Can you please, clean up the city of Chicago for me?
I mean, so there is a level of where that would work, right? Like, if that would put them a little bit more in control. But I think it's challenging, because if you don't feel like there is a need to have the National Guard deployed in your city, you're going to kind of stand firm on that. And so if a governor says, okay, I would like to have federal resources, why does it have to be the National Guard?
Right.
Why can't it be other federal dollars? Why can't it be something else? Instead, if they say, yes, we want this, they're not getting other federal resources. There's so many other levers that we could pull. Instead, we're just pulling National Guard. And there are times which we really need them, right? And so when we think about Katrina, or when there was the civil disturbance, the Freddie Gray incident in Baltimore, we came in a support capacity behind law enforcement. We did not take the lead. We were not there forever. As soon as things were stabilized, as soon as we felt like we could withdraw, we left just as quickly as we came in. And we made sure that we turned everything back over to the local law enforcement, right? So we were partnered with them all the way. So it can work as long as there is a plan, as long as we know what the criteria is. What are they supposed to do? So what is the mission? What is the impact that you want to be able to achieve? And that's what we're not talking about. And then how are we going to measure that, right? We heard Mitchell actually talking about the measurements that are not there. Well, how are you going to measure whether or not you are achieving those particular effects? So it should be a little bit more strategic, a little bit more planned. If you think about New Mexico, I think the New Mexico governor actually deployed their National Guard in a way that allows law enforcement to be able to do more. It's very intentional. It was very direct, and they understand what their mission is. So that's what we need to be thinking about, is making sure that we are not just doing it and saying, okay, get out there and now
Yeah.
do what you need to do. What is that mission?
That will have to be the last word. That's retired Major General Linda Singh of the Maryland Army National Guard. We've also been speaking with WTOP News Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And thanks to everyone who called in. Thanks to our friends here at LAist in Pasadena for hosting us this week. Hasmik Pogosian at the board, Bianca Ramirez, Jeff Rowe, and Rick Esparza. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We've got extra episodes of our One Thing Trump Did podcast every week, available only on the Middle podcast feed. And next week, we're going to be back here asking you how the government shutdown is affecting you. And if it's over by then, we've got a secret plan for our show. So stay tuned. We have to plan this whether it happens or not.
Yeah. Either way, our number is 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. You can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Bermastaz, John Barth, Annika Dessler, and Brandon Kondritz. Our technical director is Steve Mork. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.